Yeah, we're live. Hi, guys.
To be or not to be, Rapture and the Lawless one. That's what we're going to look at today. And the early church fathers had a lot to say on this. And what I'm about to reveal to you and read to you, you can find online. I have some of the descriptions and where to find them online. And you can read them yourself. And
hey, Diane,
good
to see you.
Know you're reading ancient.
I thought I was sort of half pie giving a strike because you know that show I played yesterday, it stopped midstream. It always do that. It always does that when I do King Charles stuff. If you remember, every time I do that, it does that stop stream halfway through. So I immediately deleted when I hung up.
Text.
Hey, Phil, good to see you, mate.
Written in either Latin or Greek. And so you will have an idea of what they taught, what they believed. And many of those ideas came over into modern day theology. It's where we get it. A lot of people are saying the rapture is not in the Bible. The rapture, the early church fathers never mentioned it. We can't trust it because that was a later addition by the RC Church, the Roman Catholic Church. However, the Roman Catholic Church did everything to suppress that idea. You know, go figure. I mean, go figure. I don't know. Maybe scholars and better minds than I can tell you better than that. I'm hoping to try to get Dr. Ken Johnson on here. Maybe we can talk about that or whatever other things. We'll see if I can get some more people on here and do some interviews with. But in the meantime, we're going to look at if there's a rapture or not going to be a rapture. What did the early church fathers say about it? They had a lot to say about it, actually. And I'm going to begin just with one person. I'm going to begin with Irenaeus of Lyon. And Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of the Apostle John. So you're talking in the line of succession, not very far removed from hearing it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, of what John actually taught. These people were trained, and you read their letters, they are sticklers for accuracy and not lying or embellishing stories to be right. They are all about on guard against their pride, and they warn constantly about people who are not on guard against their pride, and they stray off and spin the scriptures however they want, and they're telling everybody not to do that. So they have a consistency about it. So let's look up Irenaeus and what he said if there's going to be a rapture.
Hey, Johnny. Hi, Susan.
So we go here to
hi again, yeah.
Irenaeus Against Heresies, Book 5, Chapter 5, Verse 1. This is where our first clue comes from. He talks about Enoch. He says, for Enoch, when he pleased God, was translated in the same body in which he did please him, thus pointing out by anticipation the translation of the just. Elijah too was caught up when he was yet in the substance of the natural form, thus exhibiting in prophecy the assumption of those who are spiritual, that nothing stood in the way of their body being translated and caught up. For by means of the very same hands through which they were molded at the beginning did they receive this translation and assumption. There's several reasons why he wrote this the way he did. One was we're going to see in another verse is that he is going to be talking about an escape and rapture. That's what he's talking about. But also when he talks about Elijah here going up, being translated in the flesh, both Enoch and Elijah translated into heaven in the flesh. That is a swipe at the most parasitic ancient religious system that they were battling at that time, which goes back to ancient Hermeticism and beyond. This is ancient Gnosticism, where there's dualism. There's only material world and spirit. The material world has to die and be totally destroyed.
Susan, I get confused with emails. That's how bad I am.
only the spirit can remain. And so what he's saying, that the flesh was, there was a translation into, in other words, they went to heaven in their flesh. However, their flesh was changed. That's what he's talking about. You read his theology, that's what he's talking about. Because he correlates it to Jesus' resurrection. Even though Jesus was raised, he had a new body, a new type of material body. It wasn't this dualism, ancient Gnosticism, okay? Because they're battling this parasitic religion like to take over other religions and pervert them. It's very satanic religion. There's different branches of it. I don't have time to go into all that. So he's talking about here, read it again. For Enoch, when he pleased God, was translated in the same body in which he did please him, thus pointing out by anticipation the translation of the just. So there's going to be a translation of the just, those people who know Jesus Christ. Okay, let's look at another scripture from Irenaeus against heresies, book 5, chapter 29. This refers right to the end times. And therefore, when the end of the church shall suddenly caught up from this, it is said, there shall be tribulation such as not been since the beginning, neither shall be. He's referring to Matthew chapter 24, 21. He goes on, for this is the last contest of the righteous, in which when they overcome, they are crowned with incorruption. Folks, this is Irenaeus, and people say Irenaeus never mentioned the church would be caught up before the tribulation period. It just read it to you. Yes, he did. And so what the naysayers want to say, there's no rapture, and that's fine. If that's you, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you. I don't want to fight you. I don't hate you. I don't have a bone to pick with you. I don't want to crucify you if you believe different than me. And I look at you in compassion. I respect your view, and we can debate this in a civil manner. But I'm finding, like the Bible prophecy says, in the latter days, men will be very proud. They'll be haters, and even in the church, they'll hate you to death if you don't believe like they do. And they will openly crucify you before all, especially when it comes to the rapture.
On the tablet.
You might have a disagreement, but the Irenaeus, it did say that there was some type of event that's going to happen when the church is suddenly caught up from this. And after that, there will be tribulation will happen. Okay? That is an amazing thing. That's what he taught. Let's continue. This is where the naysayers say Irenaeus never taught this. They go over. But you got to understand, Irenaeus said this in book 5, chapter 35, section 1. He says this. He says, if, however, okay, before I begin to read this, I don't have the entire context. I had to break this up so I don't lose you, because I'll explain.
Threats against them, Diane. They're the ones threatening everyone else with their Palestine protests. I'm talking about the link you just posted.
In a minute, so let's go ahead. The very first sentence of chapter 35, verse 1, or section 1. If, however, any shall endeavor to allegorize prophecies of this kind, they shall be found consistent with themselves in all points, and shall be confuted by the teaching of the very expressions and questions. In other words, they'll be found out to be liars, because there is going to be consistency if you're teaching something, but if you allegorize these prophecies, and below that he lists a whole litany of different scriptures where they allegorize the coming Antichrist, and that this has already happened. Things like that.
Yeah, Diane, they're no longer the victims. They're the perpetrators nowadays. We all know that.
They allegorize everything. He says, don't. And basically his tenor is, like Dr. Ken Johnson says, of immature Christians. They're immature Christians. When I want to allegorize and say that there is no event that he's going to be discussing in a minute, and he discussed prior, which is the church will be caught up before the tribulation. Okay, he said, don't allegorize these things. That's a sign of immaturity. It's what did he say? They'll be confuted, rebuffed by the teaching of the very expressions and questions. Okay, And I didn't write all the scriptures he quoted, but I go down to this section. For all these, in other words, were unquestionably spoken in reference to the resurrection of the just, which takes place after the coming Antichrist and the destruction of all nations under his rule, in the times in which the resurrection of the righteous shall reign in the earth, waxing stronger by the sight of the Lord. And through him they shall become accustomed to partake in the glory of the Father, and shall enjoy the kingdom.
Hey, I was good to see you.
Fellowship, deep fellowship and communion, talking to with the holy angels, and union with spiritual beings, and with respect to those whom the Lord shall find in the flesh, waiting him from heaven, who have suffered tribulation, as well as escaped the hands of the wicked one. There is a lot to unpack there. What he's talking about is after the church is removed, let's go back and look at this. Therefore, in the end, the church shall suddenly, without warning, be caught up from this, and said, there shall be tribulation, such as not been since the beginning, and neither shall be. So the church will suddenly be caught up before the tribulation period. You can't get any plainer than that. And then he goes on, for all these other words, unquestionably spoken in reference to the resurrection of the just, takes place after the coming of the Antichrist. He's speaking, and you find out in his writings, he's speaking of the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And
G'day, Darren. Good to see you, mate.
Talked about a literal 1,000-year reign, not an allegorical, off into infinity. Doesn't know 1,000. One day is 1,000 years. So how long is 1,000? You calculate. That's how 300 and some odd thousands and thousands multiplied thousands of years. No. It's talking about a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ, and the saints coming back to be riding on white horses in Revelations 19, and Jesus is going to take over, and the saints are going to rule and reign on earth with the survivors of the tribulation for 1,000 years. Why is this important? Because all the prophecies of Israel will be fulfilled to the Jewish people. That's why. God's not a liar. He's going to carry out his word. All the unfulfilled promises will be to Israel will be fulfilled in the millennial. And there's a passage in Isaiah says, let us come, let's go up to the house of the Lord. They're talking about people bringing their gifts up to the Lord. They see the Lord and the wealth of the wicked's given. It's in Isaiah 61. The wealth of the wicked's given to the righteous. Talking about the saints and the Jewish people at that time is when that happens in the millennial reign. Okay, it's all these prophecies that are unfulfilled will be fulfilled in Israel. Then Satan is released for 1,000 years, and I won't say too much about that because not too many people say anything. I do know some stuff about it, and there's a reason for it. Maybe I'll discuss sometime in the future, but not right now. It's interesting to know that. But when the devil is released, he's not going to have any of his minions with him. There'll be no demonic beings to help him. And you'll see this in Hippolytus' writings, how the Antichrist will have demons helping him, just like the book of Revelation says, to carry out this diabolical plan they have of taking over the world. Okay? So anyway, it is an interesting thing to look at, when you realize here, as he says, to the resurrection of the just takes place after the coming of the Antichrist and the destruction of all nations under his rule, in the times in which the resurrection of the righteous shall reign in the earth, waxing stronger in the sight of the Lord. Through whom they shall be accustomed to partake of the glory of the Father, and shall enjoy the kingdom and deep fellowship and communion with holy angels and union with spiritual beings. Wow. Spiritual beings. I have no idea what that means. In other words, I think what he's saying, and I can say from experience, he's talking about there's different types of angelic beings. There's spiritual beings up there. They're not even mentioned.